My name is Tony Goodwin. I'm the founder, chairman and chief executive of Antal International, a global recruiter. We have 126 offices in 37 countries and started our business actually 20 years ago this year, 20 years ago this April in 1993. And the focus of my business really was to take best practice recruitment techniques from London and the West into Russia, Moscow in particular, and other parts of Central and Eastern Europe. Post the fall of communism and the changing market situations, I just thought that Russia was one of the most exciting countries on the planet, and I thought, why not get on a plane and go there in 1993? So despite people saying to me, isn't it a bit dangerous, or isn't it a bit difficult to do business there, and also, but Tony, you don't speak Russian, how are you going to do this? And fortunately for me, I said at the time that English was going to be the business language to begin with, and again, fortunately for me, I was right, partly because of America and the English language, everyone wants to learn to speak it. I think that has changed now, though, in Russia. I think it's very important, like my old colleague Luke Jones, that people do speak Russian. But I set it up with Tremaine Elson, who was a Russian speaker, and he ended up marrying a Russian, and he's got 3 children who are half Russian. And so that cultural affinity with Antal International, its recruitment services, came from the people that I hired to work within the Moscow marketplace. And very quickly we established ourselves in Moscow. It was a really fun and interesting time in the 1990s. Difficult time for Russia and Russians, I appreciate, and lots of change. But for us, it was a very profitable time until August 98, when the crisis came. But what we did during that crisis was we made a decision to stay in Moscow rather than pull out. A lot of Western companies were thinking of pulling out, and a lot of people didn't invest. And we managed to stay, remain, and obviously we cut our costs and cut a number of staff, but we stayed there and we showed our commitment to our Russian clients in particular, to Russia and the Moscow marketplace. So, so when things recovered, everybody knew that Antal International had staying power, had stamina to go through difficult times with the Russians and with our Russian staff. So I think that set us apart from the competition. Then what we did, which was interesting that other businesses don't do, is that we got all of our other offices around Europe, Central Eastern Europe and China, to give referrals for companies investing into Russia, so that we then dealt with companies from all around the world: Germany, France, Italy, Spain, China, the Middle East, parts of Africa, America, obviously Canada, and South America in parts, and got the clients that were investing into Russia onto the Antal client base by talking to people, by networking, by using our network and our platform to get all the foreign direct investment, all the FDI coming into Russia. We network through organisations like SERVA, the Russo-British Chamber of Commerce, the European Chamber of Commerce, all the other chambers of commerce, and using our people skills, because we are a service business and that's what we do, using our people skills to generate business and business develop through a networking opportunity. So that's how it grew, and we were fortunate that after the crisis we carried on growing, and we hired some really good Russian staff, and I think what was quite an eye-opener for me was to see how well educated the Russian middle classes were. In fact, from a professional recruitment company perspective, Russia was a great market because although under communism it didn't have the kind of capitalistic structures, what it had was a nascent middle class, very well educated middle class. Effectively, it wasn't called that under the old regime, but that's what it was. And so for us as recruiters, recruiting young professionals, because we act in the middle area, not at the top, so it's not all CEOs, it's qualified accountants, lawyers, sales and marketing professionals, IT professionals. So we had a ready-made source of candidates through the fantastic Russian education system and the Russian university system, which was second to none. You know, it was as good as anything in the West, and that was good for Antal. The CEO hiring market globally is an interesting one because it is the developing markets of Russia, China, India, Middle East, Africa and so on, which are now attracting some of the best talent from the West. It used to be seen that if you went to a developing market, if you're working in Atlanta for Coca-Cola, or London for HSBC, or New York for JP Morgan, that to move to a developing market was a sideways move for your career, or even a downward step. It used to be seen 20 years ago that as a CEO or a senior manager, director, senior vice president, whatever your title was, if you had to move to a developing market, that meant that your career at the head office level, at the HQ level, was being sidelined. You're being stopped from progressing to the group CEO position or the group managing director roles. Now, however, that whole psyche has changed, and this is where Antal really came into its own, because I believed 20 years ago that international companies would need international management. That means that if you're Coca-Cola in Atlanta or Microsoft in Seattle or any of the big Canadian, European businesses, your HQ wasn't the place for you to be. Actually, the place for you to be was where the sales and manufacturing and distribution and business was, which in the last 10 years in particular we've seen was in the developing markets. So we've seen a big influx of talent from around the world. We're now entering into a truly global talent marketplace. It didn't exist 20 years ago. People were talking about it 20 years ago. Jack Welch at GE, for example, was talking about it 20 years ago. But actually, prior to the internet, it didn't exist. And actually, Antal was a little bit ahead of the curve. We almost were too early, because I envisaged back in the late 80s that we would have a global marketplace for talent by the mid-90s. And actually, we didn't. It didn't really start to happen until the end of the last decade, 2006, 7, 8 and 9. And then, of course, we had the crisis. But now what we've seen post the credit crunch is a return to truly global employment marketplaces, where you can see that the heads of big corporations, the CEOs and managing directors and senior vice presidents of big divisions of an American company, a French company, a German company, or a British or Italian company can be South American, can be Chinese, can be Russian, can be any of the major developing market economies, because, let's face it, if the majority of that company's sales are being made in that market, then why shouldn't, and the majority of its manufacturing or the majority of its market growth coming from that market, why shouldn't a Chinese or a Russian or a South African or a South American run those businesses? because they're the ones who are on the ground, they are the ones who understand what's going on in that marketplace. Okay, back in HQ they might understand the company, product and culture better, but actually it's where the sales are being made which is critical in where you deploy your talent. And that's what we've seen, that sea change, that shift, particularly in the last 5 years. It was always going to happen, in my view, but we've seen it particularly in the last 5 years. So I would say that for CEOs and senior management, the developing markets, instead of being seen as a career graveyard, are actually career enhancing and career development. And if one wants to progress in an organisation, it's absolutely essential to have experience outside of your own country of origin. And what I would call a true internationalist, like our very own Luke Jones in Russia, who speaks 3 or 4 languages. He's British, although half Canadian, and he works in Russia. That to me typifies and exemplifies exactly what a true internationalist is. I don't like using the word expat because expat assumes, in my view, it's an old-fashioned word associated with an old-fashioned mentality of you're going abroad because you can't progress at home. Whereas an internationalist, multilingual, multi-talented, great education, great view of the local markets, internationalists and internationalism is the future of the global recruitment marketplace and the global talent marketplace. The banking market globally is an interesting one because banking has been hit by the credit crisis in 2008, and the areas that now are being highly sought after in banking have been in private wealth management. And we have hired in China, in Russia, in India and in parts of Middle East and Africa on the private wealth management side. Also in commodities trading and natural resources financing and infrastructural projects. But the mainstream banking, corporate finance and corporate advisory banking has been shrinking significantly. We're not experts in that field. We do some recruitment into banking, but we've noticed that in London, for example, one of the world's top financial centres, that the amount of banking recruitment has gone down significantly in the last 3 years. And if that's happening in London, then it must be happening around the rest of the world too. Antal isn't a specialist in that area, but we do see the fact that the market is contracting in most areas apart from private wealth management. What is happening in the food and fashion market, as far as we're concerned at Antal International, is that there is 2 markets, that there is a polarisation of the markets. So you have at the very top end the super brands like Hermes, Prada, Louis Vuitton, LVMH, the company, and at the bottom end the Zara, Inditex, Primark, very fast-moving consumer fashions. And in the middle ground, that is where companies are struggling, like Marks and Spencer and BHS, and the mid-tier retailers are really being squeezed by the high end and the low end. So if you're not in super luxury goods, high priced, high premium, and you're not in quick sale fashion, Zara, Inditex, kind of Massimo Dutti, then you are struggling with the internet. The internet is destroying the mid-market for the fashion marketplace. There is no doubt about that. Some of our best clients come from the developing markets, and China has been a big buyer of super luxury brands, but also is a great consumer of Zara and Inditex, Massimo Dutti brand and labels. Similarly, in food, what we've noticed in our Spanish office, for example, is that Aldi, the German supermarket, low cost, low price retailer in food, is doing extremely well. It's one of our biggest clients. And the lower margin shops in retail, like Poundland and the cut price discounters, are having a very strong period of sales. So what we've aligned ourselves to, quite interestingly, is the high end and the low end in Antal across the world. And that I think that applies in all markets: Russia, China, UK, America, everywhere. It's the internet is squeezing, the economy is squeezing the middle ground, the internet is squeezing the middle ground, and you've either got to be at the low or at the high end of the market. Antal operates two business models. One is wholly owned, which is like Michael Page, Hayes, Robert Half, and Robert Waters. And we also offer a franchise offering. And that enables us to take on people who are very experienced and to run their own Antal businesses as an Antal franchise. So in China and Russia, we were wholly owned. But in India, we are franchised, and we now have 36 offices in India, and we feel that India is a franchisable market and also we're thinking of doing this in China, because in India and China, people want to be their own boss. They've really embraced capitalism, and they've really embraced the idea of being an entrepreneur. And so we can, by being a franchisor with franchisees, we can specialise in any of the areas which are growing. And we don't have to be stuck in the old industries if those industries are losing people. So we can get our franchisees to specialise in any area. And India is working particularly well at the moment for Antal with regard to franchisees. In other sectors that are doing well for us, in China it's automotive, pharmaceuticals, medical devices, and retail at the bottom and the top end, as I discussed earlier. Likewise in Africa, those areas of the market. But what we hope to offer at Antal is a franchise network which we see growing from about 120 today to more than 400 offices in the next 5 to 8 years. And that's all based on getting specialists to come in to run their own Antal business as an Antal franchise.